Hi, my name is Rensl Dillon, and I'm honored to speak at the Caribbean Association of Principals of Secondary School 2021 conference. I'm really excited about talking about this topic. It's something that has been a passion of mine for a long time, and I'm titling my talk Innovation for Life. Thanks to Principal Carrington James for the invitation. It was many years ago that I was in her chemistry class at Signal Hill Senior Comprehensive School in Tobago. A little bit more background about me. I have Caribbean roots. I was born in St. Lucia and lived the majority of my childhood in Trinidad and Tobago. I have a wife that I met in college from India, and we spend a lot of our time with our children between Trinidad and Tobago and India. This is a picture of my family here where my parents were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary in New Jersey, where I live. A bit about my academic background. So I went to school in Worcester, Massachusetts at Clark University, predominantly to play football and also to get educated. That was a really good experience. I graduated with a BA in chemistry and economics. And I really enjoyed the research that I was afforded the opportunity to do on batteries. So because of that experience and a contact at Clark University who had professors at Northwestern University, I went out to Northwestern University and I did my master's and PhD in inorganic chemistry. My thesis was all about the electrolytes in battery systems, specifically lithium-ion batteries. I then transitioned out to New Jersey, where I postdoced at Princeton University and worked on fuel cells. At this point, I had 3 job offers, 2 which were linked to my field, batteries and fuel cells. And for reasons to this day that I don't quite understand, I chose to go to Colgate-Palmolive Company, where I've been for 19 plus years. Why this choice? I believe it's just destiny. And I've had a very, very good experience working for the company for the last 19 plus years. I've worked in many different areas. Currently, I support and lead an R&D group that supports 3 brands, LTMD, PCA Skin, and Filorga. They are 3 premium skin health brands that are new for Colgate. So that's my background. Today, I really want to talk to you about how to create innovation transformation. And I see here your theme for your conference is breaking barriers, transitioning beyond the norm. And I love that, that theme because I believe that innovation is something that can transform not just industries, but also people's lives. So let me talk to you a little bit about what I've learned over this time. One, I was trained in this particular innovation framework called design thinking. I was trained as a facilitator by a group of Stanford in the design school. I was trained with a bunch of other folks at Colgate, and we learned a lot about this, this kind of framework. The framework has been around in some form or the other since the 60s, but it really became popularized in the 90s by a company called IDEO. Basically, what the framework says is that you need to empathize, so really talk to people, define the problem from what you've learned, ideate, prototype, and then test, right? Pretty simple in terms of its construction. The devil, of course, is in the details. And then one really important facet that everyone needs to understand is that this is an iterative process. You don't do this one time, you have to do it continuously, okay? So what does that actually mean? So let me give you an example, the one that was used in our training. So an MRI machine typically is this machine in front of you here. It's very sterile, the room is sterile, it's white or gray or beige or whatever. And an MRI machine, you're required to stay pretty still for the scans to be conducted. Now, if you can imagine as a child coming into this situation with your parents, being nervous and a little bit afraid, you're faced with this situation, and the MRI machine does make a lot of noise, which then scares children, which then they move around, and then what happens is you have to go and have them sedated. So about 80% of kids need sedating when they're going into the MRI machine, right? Of course, this is not a desirable thing for the kids, the parents, or even the people working in the hospital. It's not the outcome that you would want. So the designer of the MRI machine at the time decided to go through the design thinking process. And it's really, really simple once you start thinking through all the things you can do to make the experience more comfortable for the child, the professional conducting the MRI scan, as well as the parents. And when you go through the exercise, you'll see that there are a number of very easy things that can be done. So without redesigning the instrument at all, what they came up with was a very simple way of just creating an experience for the child that took into consideration all of the things that would make them afraid: the loud noise, the anticipation of coming into the room. And what they did is they built essentially themes. So one on the left is essentially a pirate theme, and the one on the right is a space theme. So if you can imagine a child coming in and has to go through the MRI machine, what they do is they set it up like the child can wear something that, you know, a pirate costume, if you will, or a space costume. The child then comes, and there's very specific steps along the path about how they introduce the idea to the child. They tell the child that the banging noise that they're going to hear is like a cannon exploding in the pirate adventure, or liftoff going into space theme. So very, very simple ideas, and you can take a look at it. I have the YouTube link for that explanation below. So again, they take the whole experience into consideration in order to deliver something that dropped the sedation rates from about 80% down to about 2%. Okay. One really critical feature of design thinking is the words you use and how you define the challenge. So for example, a really bad design challenge statement would be create a better MRI machine. Why is this a bad statement? Well, it does two things that are really bad. One, it presumes the solution. You know, it already states that you need a better MRI machine. And I've shown you before, that was not the case. They didn't need to do that. And two, it doesn't even talk about who the consumer is, who the patient is. It doesn't give you any context for that person, the child. And so design thinking becomes really, really important when you need to talk about that challenge statement. So that's the first innovation framework. So if we look at, yes, so if we look at the good design challenges, when you reimagine the entire MRI testing experience for children between 5 to 10 years of age. So that's a good design challenge, right? So that actually takes into consideration who the user is, and it leaves space for you know, multiple solutions to come into play. Based on what I've told you right now, it'll be very hard for you to understand because, of course, this is, you know, a very, very short lecture. But the best way actually to get into design thinking is actually to do it. So if I were with you today in person, by the way, which would have been much more comfortable than doing this video at home, is I would actually take you through what we would call a wallet exercise. And in 25 minutes, I would, you know, break you up into maybe 3 teams, and essentially you would redesign what a wallet should look like, right? And it's a very simple exercise, but what you could do is you could go through the 5 steps, 5 minutes in each step, and voila, you'll have something like on the bottom right corner where you will design or you'll mock up a wallet. Once you go through the actual process and you get hands-on, you'll see the power of this innovation framework. Okay, innovation framework number 2. So this one is very specific. I was trained as a synectics facilitator. And what does synectics do? So if you think of the third bucket that I talked about, which is the ideation phase in the design thinking, it just focuses on that phase. And what is that all about? It's basically unlocking the human potential to be creative, right? It basically it's a very structured process, and we know we have it here. You explain what the task is, you explore, select, develop, and action. But it's really hard to understand what that means in this context. But the framework is what is very important. But let me give you one example of the things that I learned, you know, conducting facilitation sessions with synectics. One is there's something called in and out listening. In 10 or 15 seconds since I started speaking, all of you are daydreaming, every single one of you. You can't pay particular attention to me. Why is that? typically people speak at 125 to 150 words a minute. So, I'm probably in that average. Maybe I speak a little bit faster than most, but typically it's in that space. However, human beings have the capacity to absorb 800 to 1200 words a minute. So this excess brain capacity that can listen to me and then starts daydreaming because it's processing other things in the background. And so what this training taught us is that in order for people to be constantly engaged, we have to make sure that we have them doing multiple activities, writing notes, prototyping, thinking. And what we do is we compress the time. So every exercise is done in a short fashion. So you only have 5 minutes to do X. You only have 1 minute to do X. And then we always have a countdown clock going. And what that does is it forces the full attention, right? This excess brain capacity that I talked about, full attention to the task in order to kind of get things done. The other big aha that in this training session is that in the upper left corner, it talks about being rational, and that doesn't lead to breakthrough solutions. So it says that we need to challenge people to kind of get into what we call the absurd or irreverent spaces that are in their minds. So if you think about it, like I was born in 1970, the idea of a smartphone would be, beyond my comprehension, right? And of course, now we have smartphones, it's not a big deal. In 1800, the idea of a light bulb would also be beyond people's comprehension, right? These are not ideas that will naturally come to people because we're rational beings and emotional beings for some part, but we can see what's right in front of us. So we try to pull out of people, for example, we try to pull out what is an idea that will get you fired? We want people to bring that to the table. What is an idea that you're afraid you're going to get laughed at? We try to get that out of people. And by doing that, we're able to elevate the creativity that people bring to the table. So that's the second innovation framework that I've worked with. The third and the most recent one is a very business-focused innovation framework. It's called the Business Model Canvas, and it has two parts. It's the business model and value proposition, and combined they call it Business Model Canvas. It's a more recent phenomenon. The really interesting part of this phenomenon, though, is what they call this value proposition canvas. So it's part of the value proposition creation, but what's really interesting about it is it talks about the customer, and the customer is a couple of people. It's the person using the product and the person who is actually giving the product as well to the person. It tries to create a win-win situation. And so it takes the customer profile and then it does this value map in order to figure out if the product and service fit the customer profile. So this is a really interesting, again, iterative process that you have to kind of do a couple iterations here and a couple iterations there. And of course, this is hard for you to probably comprehend. So I'll give you an example. So Airbnb, for example, that's a global phenomenon, Airbnb, and there's others like Vrbo. But basically, all of these platforms, they're online platforms, and all they do is match people who want to rent with renters, and they match them together in an online platform that can give reviews as well as and talk through what are the advantages of each different property that you can have in a very easy way. In order to create that, what you can really go through is this customer jobs to be done. You go through customer jobs to be done and pains and gains, and I can tick through. So for example, it says here, some people want cheap accommodation, that's from the customer, whereas the person who's renting wants a really good person coming to rent their property. So both people are getting evaluated on these platforms, right? People want an authentic experience. They want somebody who lives in region. Like, so we have done Airbnb in France and Germany and in other places. And it's good to have a host who knows the area that can give you advice. Now you can get the same thing in a hotel, but it's a very different kind of experience when you're actually living in an apartment or in somebody's house, right? And so this creates a framework for you to do innovation as well. And it's a very, very powerful tool. Okay, so how should you think about all three innovation models, right? And how do they all kind of fit together? So one, I think you need to think about it from the point of view of there's bits and pieces of each one that are unique, but they're also pieces that are complementary. I don't facilitate much anymore. I don't have so much time, but when I've done it more recently, I'm taking little bits and pieces from all of them to try to bring the best out of the challenge that we're going to face. And then one more thought, if we just step back and really think about it, is what are we trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to solve problems, right? The most important thing is defining the problem. And the next most important thing you have to think about is that whatever the solutions are, you have to iterate multiple times because you really don't have any idea what will work, right? That requires a lot of humility. And I love this, this Chinese proverb. Humility is really important in innovation because we don't often know what's going to work. We just know that if we solve problems and we have multiple solutions, we are more likely to find one that resonates in the world. All right, let me give you a quick example. So let's say we've learned all of these innovation frameworks and we had a challenge, right? So let's take it to something that's relevant to all of you. So let's reimagine education solutions for children between 8 and 10 years of age from Tobago. So, I mean, that's something that we could say, oh, let's try to solve this problem and try to figure out how we can do a little bit better. All right. What could we do? So we can go through the exercise and let's assume we found out that one of the problems we identify is that personalization is important, right? Because some kids are stronger in some subjects than others. And if there was some magical way that we could give personalized education programs to each child in an efficient way, we will eventually lead to better outcomes. So I was worked with MIT Media Labs on some work where we're trying to predict moods of people. And it's a really good algorithm that you can predict somebody's mood before it happened, right? It's an interesting idea. We wanted to apply it in consumer products for a number of different reasons that I won't go into. But let's say we took that model and then we matched it to Khan Academy, which has some pseudo personalization for education, but essentially we put the two together and we have essentially this AI algorithm on steroids where you would have, child A has a different program than child B, C, and it's optimized for their maximum learning, right? Let's say we could do that, right? And that's the big idea. And we wanted to test that idea. Right? So that would be like the starting point, for example, of our problem solving. One of the things I always tell people when we're involved in, and I always put an X to the first idea after everybody gets excited about it. The reason I do that is to tell them I don't want to fall in love with the solution. I want you to fall in love with the problem. And the reason is I try to X out the idea is it sounds really interesting, but I don't actually care about that first idea because first ideas are irrelevant. What's really important is what you learn after you expose the first idea and test it, right? So I need to make sure that people also have that kind of humility. So I always do this and say, forget about that idea. Let's see what we can learn. So let's say you took that idea, you tried to test it, and then you learn from the teachers, the students, and people around the kids, the parents, and learn what was good, what was bad. And then what you do then is then you build something that's much stronger, right? And then after you figure that out, then you go and you figure out a totally different idea and then do the same thing. Again, be humble. We don't know what the right solution would be. And then my final thought is this, what I'm calling bias to action. Don't wait. I have here, what is this, GDP versus life expectancy. And it shows here clearly that, higher GDP shows that people who have a greater degree of education have a higher life expectancy on average across developed and developing nations. But it just shows that what you do is really, really important. So I really would like to leave with you final thoughts is, you can do this. Innovation requires some humility, empathy. It requires iterative action. And one really interesting thing about innovation is that it's usually radical and obvious at the same time. And I love that combination. So when you kind of hit it and you see when it starts working, whatever the solution is, you realize that, wait a minute, I should have thought of that. When you always say, oh, I should have thought of that, it's a great solution, right? Because that's where innovation really hits the spot. So with that, I thank you very much for the time, and hopefully, we'll be able to someday actually meet in person and potentially implement some of these innovation frameworks in whatever problems that you are trying to solve. So have a great conference, and thank you very much for the opportunity.